Hello, everyone, and welcome to our ninth episode of Brag Brag. I'm Valeria Gomez from Pinecone, and if this is your first time joining us today, these are the conversations that we're having with industry leaders about their journeys building with AI. And today, I got my awesome co-host, Arjun Patel from our developer relations team, and he's gonna help us go a little bit deeper into these technical questions. Arjun, do you wanna say hello?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. My name is Arjun. I'm a developer advocate at Pinecone. I am so excited to speak with Valeria and John today about Assembled. I'm happy to learn more about the company and also learn about how you're using Pinecone. So let's do it.
And of course, without any further ado, we have a special guest today, John Wang, co-founder and CTO of Assembled. Hi, John. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really excited.
Absolutely. And just to kind of set a little bit of stage, John and the whole team at Assembled really are dedicated to solving the big operational challenges. So think about the products that they're building Assembled as the secret sauce that keeps modern support teams running as smoothly, from like all logistics and planning, just to really so the support teams can just really deliver empathetic customer support. And I know I didn't describe Ensemble, with all the details. That's going to be John's turn later, but just kind of some housekeeping rules today. We love to hear from all of you, so please do not be shy. We enable the chat box, so please let us know where you're joining us from today, where part of the world you are, and also drop your questions in the Q&A box. If you do have a question for John or for Arjun or for me, please do use the Q&A box because it's easy for us to track those questions. And we will be dedicating some time at the end of the conversation to answer a few of them. Okay, now, John, now it's all you. I'm very excited about this conversation. So kind of just to set the stage a little bit for our the folks joining us today. So if you could just give us a quick rundown about Assembled, what Assembled is, and what exactly do you guys mean by support operations?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think where I should start is probably, we focus on support and customer support teams. So if you think about all of the problems of support teams, that's really where our bread and butter is. And maybe to help talk through, what we do and what support operations means, I'd love to hear if either you or Arjun have ever had, a bad support experience, and what did that look like?
Oh, I will raise my hand for this one. I had a terrible support experience with my internet service provider a few years ago. So I started working from home and I had this huge presentation coming up. It was an hour long to some like really important people at the company I was working at. And I give the presentation and I just cut out like 45 minutes in, just no audio. The whole thing gets scrambled. So I buy a new router, try to set it up, doesn't work out of the box, even though it's supposed to be approved by the ISP. I call the ISP and I'm like, hey, what's going on? I get routed to like 5, 10 different agents. I used their chat. I got like it was bad. They finally sent the tech over. The tech was like, hey, you need to download this stuff in order to do XYZ. And I'm just like, why wasn't this told to me before I bought the router? So I never got the issue fixed. I still have problematic internet. I had to move in order to actually get my internet service a lot better. So when you're talking about bad customer service, I oh my gosh, that was terrible for sure.
That's super unfortunate. And unfortunately, that sounds like a lot of support experiences that I've heard as well, especially, internet provider service experiences. What about you, Valeria?
Oh, wow. I have a really bad customer experience recently with my dental insurance. They didn't want to pay one of the visits for, that I went. And so I have to call them. They sent me through three different representatives because nobody could figure out what was going on. I have to repeat myself 3 times. I have to repeat my personal information 3 times. I was, I think, on the phone with them for about an hour and a half, just to realize at the end of the conversation that they just have my wrong day of birth. I mean, you will imagine that they would have your right information, right?
Yeah. That's super unfortunate. And I think that helps actually frame up exactly what we do at Assembled and what support operations means. To me, there is 2 parts of this. One part of it is getting the right person in the right place at the right time. And for both of you, it seems like they didn't unfortunately do that. You had to get transferred, escalated, moved around to different agents. So one part of Assembled is all about how do we make sure you get an agent immediately or as close to immediately as possible. The second part of support operations to me is how do you get the right answer to your question? And again, some bad support experiences can occur when it's really, really hard to get the right answer. And I think that's where AI really steps in, which is figuring out, based on all of the information that you have available, how you can get a really good answer very quickly. So if Assembled does its job right, and we're able to, one by one, start incorporating more and more customers, hopefully you shouldn't have those, bad customer experiences in the future.
That's fascinating. And you would think that it's like a straightforward, right? You have the people, you have the information, but sometimes there is a disconnect. And so I want to kind of go a little bit into your background. And I know you have quite experience with tech and business. I believe you founded a company called Sync back in 2014, right? And you also were one of the early employees at Stripe, right? In the early days. So with all this experience as a founder, also like as a founder member of a company, as a startup, what made you decide to, start Assemble?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think actually the founding story goes back to the early days at Stripe. Ryan and Brian and I, we all used to work at Stripe together. We were there around 50 to 100 employees. And one of the last few things we worked on was support operations. And we realized a few things very quickly when we were doing this. First, there are not very many good tools for support operations, at least back then. They're mostly focused on communication, so CRM platforms like Zendesk and Salesforce and things like that. And there wasn't very much tooling focused on what I talked about earlier, which is the right person in the right place at the right time. And if you did have one of those tools, they were really old school. It was like built in the early 2000s. It was dialogue menu on dialogue menu on dialogue menu. And it was like only worked on Windows 95, that type of thing. So that was crazy. And we were Stripe and we were trying to be at the cutting edge. So that was really difficult. The second thing that we realized was it was very hard for us to get buy-in from a lot of parts of the company. There's this, I remember very vividly, there was this pretty high up product leader at Stripe who basically came to us and they were like, why are you working on this support thing? You should go do our Bitcoin initiative, which is going to be super important for the company. And at the time, 2014, 2015, Bitcoin was really big. But what that gave us was a ton of conviction. It's like, hey, actually, there's this organization where the leaders of the organization, they don't understand that they're actually spending tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on this problem that actually, if you make 10, 20, 30% more efficient, can save you so much money. And I think if that's the case at Stripe, it's probably the case at a ton of other organizations. So with that, we went and started Assembled and tried to really take the tools that we had built at Stripe and bring it out to the rest of the world.
And you build, your company, and you're building your different solutions for the support teams. And early this year, you launched your first AI product, Assist. So I'm wondering, why now? Why did you decide to bring AI product to market, and what kind of problem are you trying to solve with it?
No, that's another good question. Actually, the things that we're doing now is something that we've actually always wanted to do since our founding. I actually remember very vividly as well. We were talking to Robinhood in 2019, and we were trying to get them as a customer. And definitely do not recommend this for people who are going out. But we had two slide decks, one for what we called workforce management and one for agent assist. And we were walking into the room and we were ready to switch to one or the other slide deck in the middle of the demo because we weren't really sure which one of these things we should pitch. So it's actually the AI and the assist side of the world has always been on our mind, and we've always wanted to expand to this. Only recently have we gotten enough enterprise clients, have we gotten to, enough customers where we're really excited now to expand our product offering. We work with Salesforce, Stripe, DoorDash, Etsy, some of the largest, most modern support organizations in the world. And they have really kind of pushed our thinking here because, in 2023, we saw a lot of customers who were tightening their support budgets. And also at the same time, ChatGPT and LLMs come out, and it becomes a perfect storm where you really see kind of like an opening for building a tool like this.
Wow, that's, it's just the right time, right? And, trying to solve for something, but also kind of helping your customers. And I was reading a little bit about Assist, and I believe you guys describe Assist as an issue automation engine for support. And I hope I have it right. So that's pretty actually intriguing. Can you kind of break that down for us a little bit? What goes into this AI application from like a product perspective?
Yeah, it's what we mean by issue automation engine is when a ticket comes in, we want to generate a really good response for a customer support ticket. And that's the core of what we do actually, which is how do we figure out what the right response is going to be? Because once you have that response, you can do a lot with that response. You can give it to an agent and say, as soon as an agent opens the ticket, here's a pre-drafted response. You can be a little bit more aggressive and actually pre-fill it for the agent, or have a separate queue for agents where it's like, hey, I have 1,000 pre-drafted replies. You just need to go click, 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 maybe edit a little bit, click, 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 and accept. Or you can finally go and automate some of these responses and send them along before a human actually even touches those. So what we're building is really the core engine for how do you respond well to a customer support question. And of course, we have a bunch of features on both the agent copilot side and the automation side. On the agent copilot side, in addition to drafting a reply, we can help you do summarization, rephrase your response using a style guide, translation between different languages, things like that. But we've found that kind of the whole life cycle is really important for us, from going between human in the loop to non-human in the loop, and being able to provide the entire offering there.
So that's super interesting to me. And I feel like customer support is like one of those canonical examples of where technologies like retrieval augmented generation or like copilot interfaces like the one you described really make a lot of clear impact. And you seem to be one of the few companies that have actually put this into production. I think it would be great for us to learn about exactly how you went about building that tech stack to deliver that product. What challenges you ran into. There are a lot of options you can choose from, right? I mean, you probably work with so many clients, that's so many different desperate data sources that you have to build one solution for that scales across them. So let's get into it. Tell us about how you built it and what key parts of the stack that you found a lot of benefit from.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it definitely starts with our LLMs and the way we fetch articles, right? So shout out to Pinecone. We're on a Pinecone podcast. So, but the way we think about it is we try to have interchangeable pieces into each part of our stack. Pinecone has been our provider actually since the beginning. We've used y'all for a year and a half now, and really use both the a lot of the vector search functionality there. We also use Algolia from a keyword search perspective to try to improve the results. For our LLMs, we have been right now have been using both OpenAI and Anthropic. It kind of depends on what month of the year it is on which one is better. And so we're always doing evals and choosing between those two things. And I think in terms of in terms of the outside technologies, we actually don't have an LLM ops platform. We mostly are still doing
Wow.
evals basically on spreadsheets. We've built a lot of the LLM ops kind of like into our code base because we were actually early enough when we were building this that we had to build some of this, and so now it's actually harder for us to move off because there's less value when moving to one of these platforms.
So much interesting things to kind of get into there. I have two kind of paths of things I want to ask you first. So from my perspective, you're probably dealing with a lot of different clients, a lot of different data sources, and that means that you need one solution that works across all of them really well. You probably don't have the resources to like custom build some sort of pipeline for everybody. A lot of people might think this as like a RAG versus fine tuning problem. So you could have some database set up with everybody ingesting their documents in and then build some solution on top of that. Or you could fine tune or adapt a model for like each client you're working with in order to increase the probability of like correct responses for that client. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you made that trade-off and why you decided on a combination of retrieval augmented generation and keyword search. And the second thing I want to ask you is, it sounds like there are a lot of mini steps in this architecture that you're offering for your clients. And so as like the person in charge, you have to make decisions on what you want to spend your resources on and what you don't. So hearing about like why you chose Pinecone instead of, for example, hosting your own vector database, what that saved you and what that gained you, and what was that able to make you spend time on that benefited you a lot. So a lot of questions, but I really would like to hear the answers to those.
Yeah, I think both of them actually fly in the same vein, which is, resource allocation. And we actually tried out fine tuning, and we still use fine tuning in certain applications. I think when you look at what RAG is good at and what fine tuning is good at, fine tuning is amazing at training for a specific task. It becomes so, for example, our ticket categorization. When a ticket comes in, we actually have a asynchronous task that categorizes that ticket and puts a tag on it so that we can then use that for better RAG results, actually. That is actually an amazing application of fine tuning. And when we do that, it does a really good job because it's one specific thing that we're trying to do. However, fine tuning kind of falls down when you're trying to scale this out to a ton of companies. It also is a little bit harder to make it a generalized good model. So you can't teach a fine-tuned model a specific task and expect a generically similar task for it to be good at that task too. Which is unfortunate. You really have to be super specific about what you're doing. We've chosen RAG mostly because of the speed of updates, right? I think if you're betting on LLMs improving consistently in the world, which we are, not everyone has to make that bet, but we are making that bet. And because of that, being able to update prompts, being able to have a pretty generalized infrastructure, like you said, we host a vector database. We logically break down our different customers in that database, and we're able to update our prompts very quickly with RAG. That is just something that makes us able to move a lot faster.
And my background is in data science, so very often I think about the quality of the data that I'm passing to the models that are coming in downstream. So having a system where you can have a vector database like Pinecone, have that be the knowledge store for the large language model that you're working with, and then just focus on including high quality data really benefits you and makes it a lot easier than focusing on model tuning and development and all that sort of stuff. Have you noticed that trade-off as well? And do you find it benefits you to spend less time training models and more time kind of solving the core value proposition of your company? Totally. A little bit of a leading question, but what do you think about that?
Totally. No, I think when we spent the time training our fine-tuned model, the funny thing is that we actually originally built it on 3.5 Turbo, which was one of the only models that you could fine tune. But now there's 4.0 Mini, and you have to essentially fine tune every time a new great model comes out. And that the process of finding the really good examples, understanding how your fine tuning is going to be affected by the types of examples you provide. That actually changes quite a bit model to model. So we had to actually spend a lot of time moving from 3.5 turbo to 4.0 mini. Whereas when we are actually moving from 3.5 or 4 to 4.0, it was really plug in a bunch of evals, and in a few hours we realized, okay, 4.0 is much better for our RAG. Let's just swap it over. So it's allowed us to move a lot faster, and I don't think the gains necessarily, especially for what we are trying to do in terms of answering support questions, has been good enough for us to wait a month for the next best model and be able to plug that in quickly.
So speaking about evals, which is another thing I'm really interested in, especially when it comes with retrieval augmented generation. I think a thing that a lot of people have problems with is when they build like, an example RAG application or even something that's shipped to production. It's very difficult to understand what impact that has versus some sort of baseline or versus some sort of existing solution. And I know you all have worked with a lot of different clients. So I'm sure you have some stories about how you were able to speed up or do something. So in addition to hearing that, I would also want to understand like what the eval and update pipeline kind of looks like. So if I'm a customer support agent, I get a response that's really good. How do you know to use that response again in the future, for example? Or what do you learn from that good generated response or the bad generated response to improve and maintain your models and pipeline over time?
For sure. There's two parts to this, and I think I'll talk about the first part, which is the eval part first. I think we kind of cheat because we have this amazing we're in this amazing space where you just get free evals, and the way
Yeah.
we do that is a customer support question is going to be answered, well, most likely by one of our customers, and it's either going to be via AI, completely via human assisted AI, or via a human themselves. And so we get this free kind of like A/B testing framework where it's like, okay, we don't actually have to provide you a answer. We're going to say, hey, there's no answer. And we can actually keep that in the background and essentially diff between what the human actually sent and what we provided.
Mm.
And there are different ways that we use that information. For example, we have our automated evals that run on top of that. And essentially, it's an LLM prompt that is like, how close do these match? There are a bunch of specific areas that we look for, including tone. Is the answer the same? Are the steps similar, etc.? As well as the human type evals. I mean, human evals are still the gold standard. We still haven't found a way around that, but the really nice thing about support is that you get both of those at the same time.
So if I'm understanding correctly, you have a mix of automated and like high quality natural labels that are coming in for you to understand how well your model is performing. So the fuzzy, maybe coarse measure is like this LLM based grade rubric grading. And maybe the more high quality measure is, did the customer service agent actually use this response we created or use whatever documents we presented, so on and so forth. How do you show that your product is benefiting the clients that you're working with? Like, do you have a dashboard that kind of shows this, like, hey, we were able to solve XYZ percentage, or how do you track those measures over time?
Yeah, great question. There's a bunch of different ways for this. And because we actually have built out a lot of support tooling and a support insights over the years, this is like really down our alley. The first part would be showing you how much agents are using it, how many questions and answers are responded to. In the case when we auto send, it's how many times did we send it and no one responded back, and we had good CSAT, right? CSAT is the survey you get at the end of a customer support question. So those are really easy, and I think everyone should be able to pull that data out because it's just, keep count of how often this happens and, things like that. The other thing that we do is try to incorporate the actual customer support metrics for your entire company. And that's really when we start actually running some experiments with your team. When we bring on Assembled Assist, we'll actually take a baseline. Where is your handle time? How many cases are you solving? Where is your customer satisfaction score? What's your quality score? And then we have dashboards that actually provide the difference over time when you bring us on. So really kind of twofold, because those are very lagging metrics. And you can't provide those at the beginning of a pilot. You have to be providing kind of like, how often are people using this? You know, how many auto sends did we provide? And only after people have used it long enough can we provide those deep metrics, but they provide much more insight about ROI, which is why that's valuable.
All right. I know we're getting close to the Q&A session time. I have one more kind of question for us to talk about so we can have some discussion with everyone that's on the call. What are like maybe 2 or 3 tips or things that you've learned while you're building this product, Assembled Assist, that you think would be great for other people on this call to use in their own products or in production? Like, what are some things or mistakes maybe you made that you're able to fix? Or maybe when you're applying Pinecone, you figured something out that was able to help you bring the product to production a little easier. So let's hear it.
Yeah. I think the first thing is writing a lot of prompts really helps. And it's so dumb, but it's actually a key insight that we had. It's underrated because I was working with someone on the team who didn't have a lot of prompt experience. They were trying to write a particular prompt to solve something. An engineer who came in to pair with them had a ton of prompt experience, and instead of spending a day or two, which they had already spent, they actually were able to finish that out in 10 minutes and actually have much higher accuracy with a really good prompted reply. And so actually it's very similar to the concept of like a 10x engineer, where if you kind of like understand the nuances of how to write prompts, you get these crazy exponential curves in how much you can do and how quickly and how high quality you can actually write these things. So I would say tell your team to write a lot of prompts. You'll get to understand that every single LLM has their own kind of personality and their own prompting regime, I guess. I think the second tip I would say, very similar and very related, a technique that we've been using a lot is using LLMs to tune our own prompts. LLMs tend to understand their prompts really, really well. And you can actually take bad examples, incorporate those into your prompts, and ask the LLM to rewrite your prompt for you. And especially for people who aren't prompt experts, this gives you a really, really good baseline for where to start out. Because just there's actually been a bunch of papers on this meta prompting technique, and these papers have shown that it's actually a really good way to write prompts. Let's see. I have one more, which is find people in the space to talk to, because they'll help you keep up with the latest things, especially researchers. If you know any PhDs in LLMs or generative AI or just machine learning in general, they probably know who to follow on X, I guess it is now, and who to talk to day in, day out, because the space moves so fast. It's so hard to keep up.
That's for sure. And that's why that we are having these conversations, because what is a better way to learn that from the ones who are actually building it? I see a lot of questions coming in. Let's see. I had a poll that I didn't have time to do it, but I'm going to do it now just to kind of engage the audience a little bit. I'm curious, you just heard from John these 3 amazing tips. So what about you tell us where in the journey we're building with AI you are right now? Are you just getting, learning? Are you currently just kind of learning and experimenting with small projects? Or you're actually now building and you have now AI prototypes and, you are working on deploying solutions very soon? Or you are on the other category of just scaling. You are deploying, scaling, and optimizing your AI systems in production. I'm going to give you a couple more seconds to answer. And let's see, I think I'm gonna end this and I'm going to share the results so we can all see. I don't know, can you guys see that? Sometimes I don't know if you can or not.
Looks like mostly in the middle, building.
Yeah, so we have just a small percentage learning. Hopefully you're taking all the tips and from Jump today, and you're, yeah, 67% of you guys are building. This is amazing, and 17 are scaling. So this is a very good representation of what's happening. So this is, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to go to the questions. We have very specific questions, John, and do you see them or you want to just kind of read them?
Yeah. I see one that's like really interesting that I also forgot to ask. Peter is asking, what is your vector database evaluation process and what made you decide to use Pinecone instead of other vendors? So would love to hear this. Like, how did you figure out that this was the right database for you?
Honestly, so the vector database, we didn't. The funny thing about our choice of Pinecone was we just went with it because we were trying to build quickly, and Pinecone was the leader in the space. So it's really kind of easy to just say, hey, we're not going to spend time on the vector database itself. We think the embeddings are actually quite important, and how you update and change things around on the how you actually use the database is really important. But Pinecone's, relatively inexpensive for us. We're not like paying out, the cost of like what you would pay for AWS. It's really easy for us to kind of move things, change things, and we never really thought twice about it. In terms of the evaluations of the search itself, we spent a long time actually building out our evaluations, and we actually have a framework. I had a quick blog post about it, about how we do hybrid search. So we have a framework where we can actually plug and play multiple different types of databases, whether it's vector search, whether it's keyword search. We're actually testing GraphRag from Microsoft out right now. And I think it's something that's really useful because being able to try out different embeddings without kind of breaking your production system is quite important, and being able to essentially feature flag certain things on for customers and feature flag things off gives you the ability to move much faster, especially when you've gotten to that place where you have that baseline level of quality and you want to keep bumping that up without, it's very easy to bump that down accidentally in kind of like the normal data science way.
And I just shared the blog that you wrote with everybody because it was amazing. And so everybody should read it to learn a little bit more about a hybrid search. And there you go. Amazing. Let's see, we have more. Arjun, do you want to take some of these?
Yeah. Is it cool if I keep going down the list?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great. So John, actually, you just mentioned using different embedding models and the importance of kind of picking a good one. Arnab here has a question exactly about that. Like, what's on tap for you now, and how did you decide that was useful? And I would like to hear if you had to decide different ones across the clients you're working with and across industries. So yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah. So that's a great question. We have not decided to use different embedding models across different industries. And the main reason for that was actually because we don't want to spend that much time on the embeddings, because actually every time you change the embedding, you have to resync quite a lot of data. And it's quite a heavy duty flow. We've actually spent more of our time on the context length and the chunking size changes. And we found that has been really helpful, mostly because the models now, especially in the the Sonnet 3.5, the 4.0 mini, the 4.0 era of models, they have so much context length that the kind of, if you were to go a year ago and look at the token sizes of the chunking of like 2,000 tokens or 1,000 or 500 tokens, that's not very good anymore. And you can actually really increase the size. And what we've spent a lot of time on is actually just creating that graph of what does it look like for different chunk sizes, and what's the performance, and also how much does it cost for us to do all of these, and try to make a good decision based on all of that.
So that's a great point. That's something I've been thinking really hard about really recently, because even though you have long context, large language models releasing that can take advantage of all this extra information, like you're saying, you still need to prioritize the kind of information that you're passing to the LLM. And something like a vector database can help you do that, like figuring out what the important information is, just sending that, so you don't get like a lost in the middle type problem where you have some information deep in your context and the model just like has no idea that it exists. But that's a great response. Thank you so much. We have an attendee who asked about fine-tuning versus RAG. So this is referring to the question I posed a little earlier, which is, some people can talk about fine-tuning and some people can use fine-tuning to solve a problem, and some people can use retrieval augmented generation. I'm going to kind of reiterate the context there before you go into your answer. The biggest trade-off here is that with fine-tuning, you can instill the knowledge inside the large language model that you're working with. So if you have a stable knowledge base, maybe like one client or one industry, then maybe it makes sense for you to just like fine-tune that model on that information so that it knows more about that information than it would about everything else that's been trained on. With retrieval augmented generation, you're offloading that information to a database, in this case, Pinecone, and you can update that database whenever you want. You don't have to retrain the model. You can add, subtract, so on and so forth. And sometimes that's good for some use cases. So John, why don't you tell us about where and when you make this trade-off, and why you knew RAG was like really important for you for the specific part of the product you built?
Yeah, they're really different tools for different problems. RAG, I think, is what you want to do when you're building and trying things out and getting something up to speed. And I really don't think you should fine tune before you have a good customer use case, before you actually have scale. Because if you're doing fine tuning, then you're probably optimizing for the wrong thing. At least in my opinion, is a huge problem for most AI companies, plus general product companies, is how do I find a good use case and solve that use case well. RAG will get you really, really close, and actually you can go surprisingly far with tuning your prompts, tuning all of your RAG parameters. You generally want to go to fine tuning once you have a specific topic or specific type of thing that you're doing over and over again, and you think that you need like that last 5-10% of performance. So I would not necessarily recommend that first. And I think if you actually ask a lot of the OpenAI, Anthropic researchers, they'll tell you the same thing. I believe what they mostly do, because OpenAI has like an enterprise team that works with these Fortune 500 companies to build out their own systems. And most of that, when I've been talking to them, is, hey, we'll spend the first 80-90% of the time working on how do we make the RAG better.
Right. And that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of concerns that come into when you start doing fine tuning. Like you could lose some of the information that the model already knows. You could drift from the tasks that you're actually doing versus the tasks that you're actually interested in. So a lot of issues can kind of happen. At least with a database, you know exactly what's in there and how you're retrieving it, and you can kind of understand that. But there's a place for both things. A couple other questions here. John is asking about you, John, about how you're using Pinecone and keyword search at the same time. So I believe this is the reciprocal RAG fusion kind of search that you have written about. Why don't you tell us about how that works and how you're using Pinecone with it, and where Pinecone kind of sits in that solution?
Yeah. So for us, we have created an abstraction that allows us to have different types of databases to fetch articles. So if you think about what happens in RAG, you start out with a question and you use that question, maybe some extra context, and fetch a bunch of relevant articles. We think of that fetch the relevant articles as the black box of like, okay, there's lots of ways to fetch relevant articles, right? One way is to use a vector database, and that's great for similarity. One way is to use keyword search, and that's great for keywords, but not great for semantic search. One of the things that our early customers were finding was when we were just using vector databases, that if you just literally typed like adherence, which is a common query for us, we couldn't get the right article because the article was named adherence, and it had adherence in a lot of different places because of how our semantic embeddings were working, we couldn't pull that out. And so we were like, oh man, should we just switch to a keyword search? But the problem with the keyword search is now you get a really dumb search. And anytime you're actually typing out results, or anytime you're typing in plain language or have a chatbot, that performs really poorly. So we wanted a solution that combines both of them. And reciprocal rank fusion is actually just an algorithm to help you combine that in a really good way. There's actually a lot of different algorithms to combine that, but I think the key for us was to understand there's an abstraction here where you pull out results from one database or type of knowledge store, and you can have many different types of knowledge stores, and somehow there's a common combiner function that combines the results from all of these, and that should have some utility or some type of heuristic to help you identify which are the most relevant articles. So that's the abstraction we built up. It was actually very close to how Google does their search algorithm. They have a bunch of nodes, and in each one of these nodes, they're doing a lot of processing for a lot of different parts, and then they combine all the search results together at the very end. So what we are trying to do is essentially provide ourselves the ability to use any new technology that comes in and combine those with the old pieces.
And that makes a lot of sense, right? Like you want the benefits of keyword search to find like maybe the specific article that you're looking for, but you also want the benefits of like a fuzzier semantic search to find all the things that maybe you're not thinking of that could be really relevant for what you need. And this problem just compounds the more and more documents there are, right? Like if you're a customer service agent, there might be like thousands or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of documents that you haven't even seen that could be important for you to find. And you might not know the words to kind of pull up those documents. So you need the concepts, and that's where semantic search kind of comes in. Okay, there are a ton of questions. I'm going to do my best to get through like the ones that I think that we should really be talking about. Richard has a really interesting question here. Richard's saying that they are asked by clients to look into LLM and RAG use cases, but very often they run into high running costs and data processing requirement issues. For example, you can't use something from OpenAI because you're sending data out or something like that, I'm assuming. We would love to hear from you about how you're able to manage these concerns like across clients, and how did you kind of fix those? And maybe where those costs are kind of lining up. You mentioned that Pinecone was inexpensive, for example. Hearing about where your costs are across the stack would also be helpful to Richard, I imagine.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question, because I don't think LLMs are the best use case for everything because of the amount of cost there is, but they're actually a pretty good general useful tool. Most of our cost goes into the LLM providers themselves. So OpenAI and Anthropic are our biggest bills. If you look at our ramp card, that's where most of it goes. And then there's like a pretty small chunk for Pinecone and kind of like our database, our knowledge databases. So we actually don't think of kind of like the vector stores as something that's going to be a huge cost for us. Usually there's a lot of stuff that you can do on top of once you've built out a solution to figure out where that cost is going. For us, we were actually using GPT-4 instead of 4.0. And while the prompt needed to be different to move us from GPT-4 to 4.0, the cost was, I think, a third or a half. And when we identified that problem, we just moved ourselves over. So there's actually quite a lot you can do to try to reduce the amount of spend you have. The biggest thing we found is actually not even in kind of like reducing the system prompt length. It's actually just reducing how often something is called.
So like caching, something along those lines.
Exactly. Yeah. So being smart about when you actually need to call an LM, because that's your biggest cost. And it doesn't matter if it does matter if your prompt is like 10%, 15% lower, but you would rather have like, hey, 50% of the time I didn't have to call something. And that made much bigger gains for us in terms of the cost. On the security side, wow, if you have an answer to this, I'd love to hear it. Our current answer on the security side is we can build our own models for you to prevent kind of data from being exported from our environment or their environment. Something else that we provide our clients is being able to use kind of like AWS and AWS Bedrock for hosted models, which for whatever reason, people are more okay when they have a lot of providers already on AWS, everything's hosted there. They just trust it better. I mean, when you're talking enterprise clients, that's just kind of the name of the game. So
And that matters, right? Like understanding where that trust is. Like sometimes it's not even about like all of the metrics. It's about how you're presenting and selling the product. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the last thing that we found has worked really, really well is just get your engineers on a call with their security people and walk them through your entire flow. We actually have an entire slide deck that just gives them our whole like RAG pipeline. And we're like, let us walk you through what happens here. And it turns out we didn't change anything. We didn't do anything different. But because we were walking them through this and being pretty transparent about it, people were a lot more open to understanding what's going on.
Great. Thanks for going into detail on that. That was really helpful. Like I said, we got a lot more on deck. We got a lot more questions we can get
and
through.
I hate to be a party pooper here, but we technically are at time, and I want to be respectful of John's time and everybody's time. I'm gonna take screenshots of these questions. Let's see if we can get some answers to you. But if not, let's keep joining these conversations. There are other amazing leaders also that will help us answer them. So don't feel bad if we didn't go through. We got a lot of questions, John. I this is the first time that I have seen so many questions. So that means that there's a great conversation. So we are very grateful that you were able to join us. So it seems people really want to learn from you and Assemble. So how can they connect outside of this virtual room?
Yeah, feel free to contact me. Just my email is john@assembled.com. Feel free to shoot me an email if you've got a question. My LinkedIn is John Wang. I can link it down below. Feel free to connect with me. Happy to be helpful if I can in any way.
Amazing. Seems like everybody's sending you LinkedIn requests. So, this is part of this. We also love to do this. Just, you connect with other leaders and everybody can learn from each other. So this is a wrap, folks, for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. And we will catch you next time on the next Rack Brag in a couple of weeks. Thank you again, John. Thank you, Arjun, for helping us go deeper into these conversations. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you want to replay the conversation today, you can using the same login. It will be on demand. So you can go back if you want to refresh what John shared with us today.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.